Hey, it's Brandon Laws. Welcome to Transform Your Workplace. Today's episode is sponsored and hosted by Xenium HR. If you're a business leader, business owner, or an HR professional who finds that they are focused on the wrong things in the organization, need a little extra help on your HR, your payroll processing, benefits, or compensation, that's why small and medium-sized organizations hire Xenium to offload some of those things they just can't get to so that they can focus on their people and growing their business. Learn more about Xenium at xeniumhr.com, and I'll put a link in the show notes as well. Okay, today's episode is with Paul Lopushinsky. He is the founder of Playficient. In this episode, we talk about the benefits of a playful workplace. We talk about what type of impact having a playful workplace has on productivity and revenue, and what most employers are getting wrong about creating some more fun and play in the organization. We also talk about what is considered playful workplace in comparison to like forcing people to have fun or participate in activities they really don't want to be a part of. So we cover all that, and then given our current times, I would have been remiss in not asking Paul about how do you create play in the workplace when you're working remotely. So you're going to get a lot of action-oriented tips from this episode, and hope you enjoy it. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, anywhere that you're on social media. I'm probably there. Happy to connect with you. My email address is also in the show notes, so feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear what you think about the podcast, about the show, or if you just want to connect and talk about whatever. I know people are maybe kind of lonely these days. I love connecting with people, especially that I've never met before. So feel free to reach out, and I'll be a resource to you. Enjoy the episode. Talk to you next week. Hey, Paul, it's a great pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Brandon.
Let's talk about how to build more playful workplaces. What are the benefits of having a playful workplace?
Well, you'll have people who are enjoying their work more, typically have more employee engagement. You'll have lower turnover. You'll have more happy employees. You'll have greater productivity. There'll be better connections between individuals. I've looked into some research that people have done on the benefits of play in the workplace. And when it comes to the creative side, it's more indirectly tied to better work done by individuals. It's more about creating better relationships amongst people that doesn't feel forced. Those that encourage playful cultures tend to have the right idea. They might be on the right track, but the wrong train, where they end up in these situations where where play becomes mandated, forced fun or mandated fun coming from on high. These events that are quote unquote optional to attend, whether that's team building or staying at the office after on Friday to hang out with people. Those typically, as I mentioned, being quote unquote optional, can get used against individuals, which unfortunately is the case. So that's an issue that organizations face when they do try and create more playful workplaces, but in some ways backfires.
Yeah, I was really curious how you even create a playful workplace without it feeling forced. And you brought that up. It's like, yeah, these activities that we might mandate our employees to do. Yeah, it's all under the guise of making it more playful and more engaged. But how many people are probably uncomfortable by you forcing them to be there in the first place?
I've been in that situation where I've been uncomfortable, where it was a lot of drinking once Friday at 5 hit, and that's fine. I'll stay for a bit, but luckily my boss was okay with it. It wasn't really held against anyone, which is good. But I know places where that gets used against people in performance reviews or have gotten, passed up for promotions. That study I was reading about, where it talked about the indirect benefits of play. It was funny because one of the people that they did research with and asked interviews actually ended up leaving during the research study from one organization because they just couldn't stand the forced fun activities. That was one of the, not the only, but a primary driver of them leaving.
Yeah. What are some examples of the forced fun? Does it tend to be events, or is it stuff around the office? Is it a mixture of both? Like what have you seen?
Yeah, it could be, the forced events of staying after work on Fridays to drink beers. And, that could be fine for a while, but some people want to go home. People have kids. There's one video, I've seen a few of them where, for example, I know a lot of this pulls from that cliche Silicon Valley style office with the ping pong tables.
Yeah, like ping pong tables and stuff like that.
But also things like Nerf gun fights. I remember watching some videos of that happening,
right.
And you can see some people in the background clearly do not want to be doing that at the moment. They just want to maybe focus on their work, or that's just the way their personality is.
Yeah.
They're not in tune with that. And I worked at an organization that had a foosball table that created a lot of issues overall because
really
well,
just like competition, or like why would we waste money on a foosball table and take up space?
It was more, there was some conflict of, I didn't have an issue with it.
Yeah. You liked playing.
Well, the thing is, we had two offices in the city, and the office I was at didn't have the foosball table, so I didn't get played as much. So when I go there, I get my butt kicked.
That's hilarious.
But the issue was some people felt they were spending too much time at the foosball table.
Oh, I see.
I'm like, well, if they're getting their work done, like, it doesn't matter to me. So it did create this little bit of resentment, I guess. But I think, a lot of organizations have had that issue. And that's been one of the nice, weird benefits about COVID, right? Is, people not really having access to the office. They could get away from these things easily, but also as a result, seeing more employee-led initiatives come up and, top down from the top management or leadership realizing like, well, we need to try something else here, which is really nice to see.
Yeah, if employers actually get it right, meaning like they create the engagement activities or like you just described, the bottom up approach to creating activities that employees actually want to do. What are we talking about? Like, as far as like, does it have an impact on productivity or revenue, or are there some sort of benefits down the road of having all of this stuff? And if you do it right, the right way, like, is there a good benefit to making sure that you have engagement activities? Like if an employer did it the right way, is there some sort of benefit?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. As I touched upon earlier, I think in your first question about, well, it doesn't directly, it's more of an indirect benefit when it comes to
like productivity or
yeah, it's kind of indirectly tied to that with as one of the benefits. It's not like a direct correlation. That comes more with, well, it helps with the relationships between people. And one of the things is there's this whole concept about play personalities, which comes from Dr. Stuart Brown, who does a lot of research on the benefits of play. And he talks about 8 play personalities that we can all have. And it's not like Myers-Briggs where you're one of these 8 play personalities. You could have multiple ones and they could change throughout your life. And for a lot of organizations, one of the play personalities is the competitor. So I typically find most organizations, when they try to create playful atmospheres or activities, they tend to be more on the competitive side. That's where you end up with ping pong tables and the classic Silicon Valley trappings. And it makes sense because leaders and companies by their nature are competitive. I'm based out of Vancouver, British Columbia, and I see a lot of cases where, well, another one of the play personalities is the kinesthete. So that's people who enjoy yoga, meditation, moving around without competition. And I'll see that in various offices where they'll have in-house yoga when it was in the office, or meditation rooms, which has now shifted towards Zoom. And for a lot of organizations, they might just stop at that and not realize, well, people have different personalities and also play personalities. So I don't have the list in front of me. I always, whenever I do these presentations, I always try and go off the top of my head, but I usually forget one of them. But of the 8 play personalities, so there's the joker, there's the kinesthete, there's the competitor, there's the explorer, there's the director, the artist/creator, the storyteller, and the collector. Okay, I got all 8.
That's awesome. So, like, do you have an assessment or something where people can identify where they fall on that? Because
Mhm.
I would imagine as an employer trying to figure out, like, okay, what activities should we do? You want to probably mold to,
Mhm.
people's styles, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. When I do workshops or webinars on the topic, I get them. I list out all 8 of them, and I get them to sit down for a bit, and in their personal life, write down what are things you currently do for play. What did you used to do for play? And at that point, just write them down. And then afterwards, we kind of sit down and go over. Okay, these can fall under, and that's the thing. Like some activities can fall under multiple categories. So, for example, I haven't done in a while, but I used to do improv comedy. That falls under the Joker, but that could also fall under the storyteller. And then after a while, people start seeing patterns. Maybe there's 2 or 3 play personalities they gravitate towards. And then also seeing, I get them both to do it, what they used to do and what they currently do, to see if there's any major differences. Because as time goes on, people retire, people have kids, or they have lifestyle changes. Their play personality might change as well. But there's usually typically those kind of patterns that start to emerge when you look into your life and see. Like for myself, I'm kind of more Joker, kinesthete, storyteller, and maybe a bit artist/creator. Those are kind of the 4 I gravitate towards. I remember one time very on doing this, and one of the play personalities is the director. So that could be literally like directing movies, but that's also people who like putting together potlucks or parties.
Mm-hmm.
I remember doing this, and what someone in the back asked, who could ever find this as fun? And about a quarter of the room did. And that's one of those things where, the expression that one person's trash is another person's treasure. What's work for one person could be play for someone else.
That's so fascinating. Well, to me, it's hard to grasp, like, how do you incorporate all of this throughout the day? Like, timing wise, are you doing it every day? Are you doing it once a week? Like, how do you, like, it depends on the size of your team. It's a lot to coordinate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, it's what I do when I come in with organizations to help them with this. It's more giving them that kind of foundation of, okay, so this is what you currently have. These are the play personalities you currently cover in the office, which typically are competitive, kinesthete. And then when we look at your team or your organization, here's some suggestions that you could do. And again, a lot of that, it's like I have a list of suggestions. It's like, all right, you could do this, you could do that, you could do that. But the best thing to do, of course, is I'm more of a facilitator to help bring about ideas that people can start to make use of. And it's been one of the benefits with COVID is a lot of more employee-led initiatives have come up where management's like, all right, well, we don't have our fancy office. I don't know, what should we do? And it's become a lot more of that, of cases of Zoom lunch and learns or doing virtual museum tours, which became quite popular, Jack in the Box, Netflix parties. The most creative one I think I heard was for an automobile company where they had a drive-in movie theater set up at their
No way.
company parking lot. So it was a way of bringing people together, but they could also stay separate social distances with cars in between them. But yeah, a lot of it has just come up through things employees like, whether you even cooking classes or employee-led yoga classes. And that's the thing that I've been encouraging organizations, if whether they go back to the office full time or if they do a split between the two or stay 100% remote, the last thing I want them doing is going back to the office and forgetting all that they've learned from this. And maybe a bunch of activities have popped up since, and make sure they carry that over. So yeah, to answer your question, it's more kind of determining what they currently do and then listening to employees and also realizing too that not everyone will gravitate towards those activities, and that's totally fine. So for example, if I talked about the director, if no one wants to put together potlucks or whatnot, that's fine. Don't force people to do that if they don't want to. That's kind of my big thing, is let it pop up organically and give that environment where it's okay to do so, all within reason, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're so right about the sort of the unintended consequence of COVID, which is a positive, is I think before COVID, employers or the leaders were sort of dictating the activities, and I'm sort of overgeneralizing, of course, but I think employees would look to HR staff or leaders or whomever to say, hey, here's the activity we're going to do. Let's go have fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with COVID, people want connection, and since we're remote, I think people are getting creative. And I like your idea of you give them some ideas, you showcase those 8 personalities, and then you sort of the bottom up organic approach. I love that. Is that you think that's a better approach going forward? Or maybe it's a hybrid approach. What do you think, like, even after COVID, we go back to the office, like, what's the best approach to this?
It's a good question.
Keeping it playful and making sure we're highly engaged.
I think it just in that previous answer I gave, there was that point where I said making sure it's the design thinking question of how might we ensure that going forward we don't forget the lessons learned from COVID, right? Of if people become more engaged, more activities have popped up, how can we apply that moving forward? Because it's easy to say, I mean, if you look throughout our own personal lives or human history, even after these big kind of catastrophic events, people say, all right, we'll take those lessons and never forget them. But we find over time that's not true. And that's kind of my biggest concern. And that's why I hammer it into organizations, that how do we ensure moving forward, like the lessons learned. I remember early on talking about this with organizations, and even more the level of thinking about even some basic things like, oh, what are some things we should know just in case this person's not around, or just in case this person leaves. I'm sure you've seen that dialogue or that diagram where it's talking about things that are urgent. Was it urgent, important, urgent, not important?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So COVID brought a lot of things that were not urgent, but were important. Like they brought that to the forefront where they became urgent, right? So for example, people develop, I saw a lot of companies say, well, people development has become number one for us, or keeping a pulse on workers, checking in with their well-being. Those kind of things that were very important but not urgent became very urgent. So my concern is organizations forget that moving forward, where it starts to become less urgent, although it's still of uttermost importance. And then maybe another incident happens, I don't know, and that brings it up to the forefront. So that's one of those things I'm kind of encouraging organizations is like, keep that in mind, that even though it's not, at this point, it's more urgent, but as things return more to quote unquote normal, it's going to become less urgent,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean it's not as important.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say, like, what you're saying makes so much sense to me right now, because it's like it's important to people right now. It's the fact that we can engage and connect and can make the workplace fun, like all that's at the forefront of our minds, because some people are just really not happy because they're at home, that whatever situation they've got, it's you're disconnected from your team.
Mm-hmm.
And all those things. And then let's say we go back to the workplace. Are we going to forget everything that we learned about how to connect and engage people from even remote? So I hope people don't forget that.
Yeah, that's my big concern.
Yeah. Do you anticipate, I mean, if you're going to make a prediction, do you think employers will get this to stick? Do you think employees will think it's important too? I don't know how you hit that home.
I mean, the optimist in me says yes.
Good.
The more realist part of me, just looking through human history, and these, even after big events, people can forget some of the lessons learned or the mistakes we made along the way, and it kind of returns to a normal. We like to find that pace. And I've seen a lot of really interesting conversations of people. I've seen some very interesting Twitter threads where people saying, work's never going to be the same again, blah, blah, blah. And I agree to an extent, but as we are creatures of habit, people are kind of going to go back to that old system. And I'm curious, I know a lot of people have mentioned now moving forward, they're like, okay, 1 or 2 days a week in the office or at home, but the office will still be there. People saying like the office will disappear. I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I think people have a short-term memory. So meaning like, okay, COVID happened and then we got kind of stuck in this work from home thing for a while. And then it's like, you've been doing it so long where you think, oh, it's always going to be like this. It's always, well, then all of a sudden we might shift. We go back to the workplace and it's like, they'll just forget about the work from home stuff.
Yeah.
It's like it never happened.
Like for example, if you look at, say, the 2008 recession and all the stuff they were saying, the sky was falling,
Yeah. Stock market will never recover, that stuff.
And and then look at it over time. It's like how well it did, and people forgot a lot of the lessons learned. So like I said, the optimist in me will say I think the organizations, of course, that adapt well and carry forward with it, of course, will do better. And one of the things that I talk about is a lot of this idea of like the what I call the stereotypical play in the office, right? Where you think of like ping pong tables or what I call the kindergarten style office. That kind of came from Google, Facebook, the FANG effect, I call it. So that's an acronym for like the big tech organizations: Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google. You can throw Microsoft, Twitter in there.
Yeah.
That a lot of companies copied from that, right? That style of office, which spread throughout the valley, which spread around the world, spread to other areas beyond software. And that was what was unconventional became conventional. So I think, what was unconventional was these organizations that were, maybe 100% remote or a mixture of remote and in the office. Now that becomes more the quote unquote like more conventional style, which will lead to some growing pains and changes. But at the end of the day, and that's my thing is these offices that are, full of all these nice doodads of ping pong tables and everything. It's like, engagement rates haven't really changed. Turnover rates haven't really changed. So there's value in it, but it's more, organizations need to, again, look beyond the ping pong table and find more ways to engage people when it comes with playful workplaces, and also give the option of like, if people just want to come in and do their work, it's totally fine. It shouldn't be held against them, which unfortunately I haven't had that happen to me, but I've known a number of people who've been in those situations where it's been used against them.
I always like activities or playful things that will grow connections at a deeper level, like the accidental conversations and learning something about somebody, like just the intimacy of all that from activity, I think is such a great benefit. And like the ping pong table and foosball, like those to me just don't really do that.
And for some people it does, and that's totally fine. Like that caters more to the competitors, I find. I mean, the organization where we had the foosball issue, it's mostly like salespeople who were spending a lot of time, and that's totally fine. They enjoyed it, but it's not for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to ask you about, so you have a great blog, by the way, just tons of great content. You had, it might have been a recent post, but you talked about the buddy system. Is that a mentorship program? Is that just something like maybe new employees can get together? Because I like that, because it's there's some playfulness in there. I think you can have activities within the buddy system. But I'd love to hear about that and what your thoughts are.
Yeah, and that's something I have to get better at and I kind of interchangeably will say buddy system and mentorship system. There is a very big difference between the two. The mentorship system, that's more personal, professional development. That one feels more formal. A buddy system is definitely a lot more, with like a new employee comes in, it's about maybe learning about the unwritten rules, learning about, the culture, the rituals, and it's much more informal, I'd say, than mentorship. And, I always encourage organizations to make use of it, and also to have multiple buddies. What was the company? Buffer, like a social media company. They have a buddy from within their team. They have a culture buddy, and they have more of a leader buddy. So they get a difference of perspectives. And that one you could be a lot more, informal with. And
yeah, I love that.
Yeah. And there's been some research, like I came across an article where Microsoft did a pilot program with it, and they found how much better, I can't remember the exact numbers, but the satisfaction and feel like they were taken care of was much, much higher with those who had a buddy system or who didn't go through the buddy system, and how many times they met as well.
It seems like it'd be such an easy thing to implement too.
And that's why I actually did an article specifically about how do we get our current employees to be buddies, because that was a problem for the organization. And I was like,
I actually a buddy system.
Yeah, I was like, I don't have a good answer for this. I asked various people. It's like, well, what are some ways that you could get current employees to become buddies to new employees? And some talked about, you could give like the incentives. I remember someone suggested, you could give them more like an extra vacation day or something like that. For others, it was more, I guess, the intangible level. It's like, well, here's the benefits. Like it helps you like develop as a possible leader, or you'll get recognized by the company for your contribution as a buddy. And I remember in one place, or someone mentioned that it was a mandatory thing for them that once they reach a certain level, like I think it was like a VP level, they had to be a buddy for system, whether they like. And I asked them, it's like, well, what if they don't want to be buddy? Because some people, it's in their personality, and that's totally fine if they don't want to be buddy. It's like, well, they won't get the VP position as a result, and that's okay, I guess. If that's their part of their expectations, where it's part of their job description, and that's one of those things. So that's something I'm still kind of humming and hawing over. It's easy for me to be like, yeah, just throw in a buddy system. Here's the benefits, blah, blah, blah. But there's also the case of, well, and I like to make it fairly informal when it comes to what people discuss with their buddies. And that's just my personality. But I know other people are like, oh shoot, like what do I have to do in this situation? So I'm still trying to find out like a good way of implementing it, of trying to encourage. I mean, yeah, you could quote unquote force current employees to be buddies to new ones, but it's more looking to like people who have been there a while, and people will volunteer, but still trying to find that right amount. I'm still trying to find a good answer to that.
Do you have a lot of employers approach you with questions like what you just stated about the buddies? Like, how do I create more buddies in my workplace, or how do I get more fun in my workplace? Like, what kind of questions are employers asking you when they approach you with their issues or whatever they're trying to develop?
Yeah. So recently, well, let's see. So I mean, like that buddy system's popped up more the last couple of weeks. I've done like webinars or workshops on employee onboarding. What other questions do I get? I've got more about employee journey mapping lately, about like how do we make use of it. The play personalities has been something that's come up. I have a whole list of things that I tell organizations, like, here's good best practices list about onboarding ideas you could use. And that's been asked a lot. The benefits of for example, like play in the workplace, that's one that comes up a lot of, like, or how do I get buy-in for these kind of things? That's
right. Because they want to know that there's a return on investment for making the workplace more playful.
And it is, that's something especially, I mean, like with stuff with employee experience design, using design thinking, that's much easier for me to be like, all right, here's some stats you can look at. Onboarding, there's a whole bunch of stats I could throw people's way. When it comes to like play in the workplace, that one I struggled with for a while. And then eventually I kind of dug in, ended up down this rabbit hole of a lot of academia articles to try and find like a good answer on that front. And a lot of it was, well, there's indirect benefits to a lot of the aspects. And one thing, there's a quote that gets misattributed to Einstein, like many quotes of his that actually weren't him, that it ends up being from some sociologist about not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. I think I got that right. So that being like, it's harder to put like that ROI on like creating playful cultures. It is there, and I'm still trying to find a good way of measuring it and looking more into academic research. Known organizations who've cut back on those fun activities because they're like, well, we haven't been able to put an ROI on it.
So frustrating.
And I've talked to someone who left that organization since. It's like, well, now there's been higher, and it's not like the only factor, but there's been more turnover. There's been more stress. There's been more burnouts at the organization. I mean, I don't want to say it's just attributed, that could be many other things, but it certainly
there's a lot of factors, of course, but you don't need to measure everything. Like I have the same struggle. I'm in marketing and I focus on a lot of brand development, but it's so hard to measure that. Like I have this podcast, I do webinars, and I do all this other stuff, and I don't measure everything because I just don't care, because I know that it's developing, it's a long-term play, and our revenue's higher as a result. So I'm like, I know that something is working. I just don't really care to measure everything. And it's the same way with creative playful workplaces or engagement and activities. It's like, do I really have to develop an ROI for this one activity I just did? That makes no sense to me.
And that's where I talk about with employee journey mapping, which is more about, it's a lot of using like storytelling techniques to help really identify, throughout the employee journey, what works and what doesn't. When it comes to our tool set of communication, like there's arguably no better tool than storytelling. And I always tell people that if you think about, I guess, TED Talks, like which ones do you remember the most? Is it the one that throws all those stats at you, or is it the one that tells, a journey, a story?
Yeah.
And of course, that's where I always encourage when it comes to, if people are trying to get buy-in is of course, you could throw stats, but don't just throw up a PowerPoint throwing stats. Like tell a story about like what can be. and versus where it currently is now.
I love that.
It's easy for me to say, though, of course, as an outsider, be like, yeah, just do this, your boss. And, that's where I'm like, and that's where I'm trying to find like, okay, I'm trying to find more. Here's some stats you could use to help you in your case. I mean, it's easy for onboarding or using design thinking to improve the employee experience. But when it comes more to that play side, it is a little more difficult.
For sure. Yeah. Well, Paul, I've really loved the discussion. I think you're doing good work. And, I want to encourage people to go check out your blog. You just have so many cool ideas. Where can they learn more about those 8 personalities? Do you have that published somewhere? Is there an assessment they can take or encourage their people to take it?
It's on my website, which is www.playficient.com, playficient.com. I'm sure you'll have links in the description.
Yeah, I will in the show notes.
It's a combination of the word play and proficient is what I had it as. I can't remember exactly the blog. It's up there on the blog. The way my blog works is I don't have a ton of posts, but it's more over time. I just update these ones. So it's usually fairly high up there. I think if you type in playficient.com/play@work, play-at-work, I think it comes up. But I'll provide a link that you can also throw in the description and everything if people are on their computers listening to this. Yeah, and it kind of goes way more. I encourage people to save it to Pocket or Instapaper, and get comfy because they're long reads that you can come back to. But it's all there.
Well, that's great. Paul, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thanks for having me, Brandon. Appreciate it.